Welcome, everybody. My name's Kiera Newbury, and I'm the co-author of a book that most of you in this room have been able to experience, yet never get to hear the rest of. You run the call, you do your job, you go back to the station or you go home, you never get to see what happens after. Today, we're going to dive into what actually happens after. And I have here today with me my dad, Brad Newbury, who's been in fire and EMS for over 40 years. And with us today, we're joined by an extra special guest, Dr. Peter Antevy, who is an emergency room physician, an EMS medical director, and the founder of Antevy, one of the most respected names in pre-hospital resuscitation in history. This is a conversation about the calls that you all ran, the lives that continued, and the ripple that was caused because you decided to show up. So let's get into it. Dad.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome, Peter. Appreciate you coming.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
For 40 years, you've been on the job, and still to this day, you continue to do it. Mm-hmm. I want to start with why. Why do you continue to do it?
Well, first, I love taking care of people. And, I've been in fire and EMS literally since I was 16 years old. And so you can do the math. I'm 56 now, and it's something I've done my entire adult life. And I love the part of taking care of people. I love that we can make a difference in people's lives. And I've now really, after so many years in doing what we do, been able to truly digest the incredible impact that we make on people's lives. And that's what we'll talk about today.
So Dr. Antevy, same question. You have credentials that could back up more than 40 years of experience. So please tell us.
It's a great question. First of all, thanks for having me, and so thrilled to be here. It's interesting, when if you look at my middle school yearbook, it's your mom puts a picture. I was on a little tricycle, and it says, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And it says pediatrician. So I think I was raised in a family where they were very giving. They would give the shirt off their back to somebody else. I had a great pediatrician, and I just saw the power of helping people. And just like Brad was saying, if you're a helper, then this is, I think emergency medicine is the field for you. Healthcare is an amazing field. And then you have to be someone who loves being and helping others in their time of greatest need and have that personality to do that. And I think that for myself, over the years, when you learn about yourself, I've learned that when times get really tough and it's very stressful, that's when I am the calmest. And so I didn't know that about myself. I just like to be in those situations, but I love the outcomes when they're great. And that's what we all strive for.
Absolutely.
I have a favorite saying that it's like, we don't wish bad things on people. We just want to be there when they happen.
That's right.
And I think that's important too.
That's some great insight. Yeah. Absolutely. So to go actually off of that, Dad, you've been on a lot of scenes that some people will never get to see, and you've walked into rooms where everything went right, but you've also walked into rooms where a lot of things went wrong. After 40 years, what does a good outcome feel like now compared to when you started?
Well, I think back when I was a young paramedic and how we saw a quote unquote save, right, was we got a return of spontaneous circulation. And it didn't, nothing else in a sense, we didn't measure anything. You go back to, as a young paramedic in the early 90s, we didn't measure the arc of time later, right? Like now where the American Heart Association is looking at 1 year later data on an individual, survivability. But back then it was just getting return of spontaneous circulation. Right. That was a huge win. Mm-hmm. Right. And we all thought it was an incredible win. And anybody who was in the audience who remembers back, many years ago, I mean, we would be so excited that we got a heart rate back. And we did some, we did some things that probably, from a medicine side that we learned later on, were not helpful to the patient care, right? I mean, particularly on, we'd get a PO2 back. It was 300. We were excited. We just keep this as that bag filled with oxygen. We just squeeze it again, and you'd ventilate sometimes 40 times a minute or higher. And of course, the science began to develop, and we learned more and more about, true resuscitation. I was involved in some calls, particularly in the early 90s, where some individuals lived and went home to their family neurologically intact. So I saw this difference as I started as a young paramedic. The win that I thought was a win was just getting a heartbeat back. But I think the audience knows that there are so many times that that individual would go into the ICU and there'd be an anoxic brain injury and their quality of life would either be almost nothing if they survived,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if they survived several days later or if now all of a sudden they have an anoxic brain injury and they have and it's going to have a fairly negative outcome for that person. And so we weren't focused on, at least when I was raised as a young paramedic, we weren't focused on that next piece. And I really started to see the difference several years after, even as a young paramedic. And really, one of the stories in the book is Frank Nagel, and Frank was one of those moments that changed everything for me, right? Where we were involved in Frank's resuscitation, and there's a great story in our book that we'll talk about. And Frank lived, and by the time I left at the hospital, he was awake, talking to his family, talking to the first physician, and he went on to live another 25 years.
Mm.
And so it's been, in my long career, I've seen this, the very beginning of what we used to consider a save to where we are now. And so many times now, here we are at our EMS school at National Medical Education and Training Center. And I've taught so many times into our students that a real save is sending that patient back neurologically intact to their loved ones, because that's what really matters.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think that should be the metric, right? And just to kind of just to play a little inside baseball, because I think what you're saying is so important, is that there are 4 survival metrics that you can kind of play with if you like, right? So you could say that our ROSC rate, or the ability for us to get pulses back, was 40%, and you can go and tell everybody how great you are, but that doesn't tell you the next survival rate, which was survival to the hospital. Meaning, did they come into the emergency department? They have a pulse. Did they survive to make it up to the hospital? Okay, check, they did that. That still is not good enough for me. Then it's survival to hospital discharge. Well, you could be discharged with a trach and a G-tube and you're in a vegetative state. That's not good either. So the one you're talking about is survival neurologically intact. Now, in the United States today, in 2025 anyway, it was 8.2%. When you look at the Netherlands, they're 25%, right? So why are we accepting an 8% when we could triple the number of people who are normal and playing with their grandkids and playing golf and going to Disney World? So I agree with you. That is the number that all of us should be looking at. That should be the number on the board, if you will, because that's what really matters.
Yeah, that's some great points. Dr. Antevy, you work with EMS systems around the country, and you see the data and you see the outcomes. But there is something in your chapter in our book about the Parkland school shooting. And I want to ask you about it because it changed the way that you think about people who save lives. Can you take us there?
Yeah, it's a tough moment. Parkland was difficult for me because my wife was the first graduating class from Parkland. We have a lot of friends whose kids are at that school, and it's a very it's like Disney World, right? Like, everybody wants to live in Parkland. It was considered one of the safest places in the country to live, and no one ever expected what happened to happen. And then the world turns upside down that day. And when I show up on scene, my phone is now going crazy, and it's not medical stuff. It's people who know me or who know my wife, whose children are in that building. So you go in there, and now it becomes very personal. And as you know, when you're running on a call and you don't know the person, it's a little easier because you're just doing what you're doing, and you're not kind of making it emotional. But when the people in there, you know them and you know their parents, and you know the officer who's going in first, Scotty Myers, he's going in first, and you know him personally. That makes it very difficult. But so unfortunately, we lost 17 lives that day, but 17 lives were saved that day. And I think that is a story that is not really told, but it's a story that all of us keep inside of us, knowing that that was a powerful day for everybody, because so many children were saved. And who were they saved by? They were saved by the first incoming officers. Why? You know, we have really smart people at this department. They had the foresight to start doing training on Stop the Bleed years before people were doing training on Stop the Bleed. And we had tourniquets, we had chest seals. Not a paramedic put that on. It was the first in police officers, the SWAT teams. They had been trained on doing that. So there were a lot of kids who were brought out with tourniquets and chest seals who would have all died, but they didn't die, and they all lived perfectly normally without any negative outcomes. And when you look back, and it's been a number of years now, when you look back, you try to hang your hat on the fact that there is a kid now who's getting married. There's a kid who's is still playing, is still having Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas dinner. Those are the moments that for us, when we look back at it, we say we did everything that we could that day. And when you look at all the reports that came out on Parkland after the fact, the one highlight they said was the medical care that happened that day at that school. And to be part of an organization that put the detail and the care and the training and the thought into doing that is something that we're still healing. As you can tell, I still feel the emotion, and on every anniversary, we still cry. And when my friends whose children are lost, when I see them, we still cry. But the children that we saved that day are that's what fills our hearts with joy, that those kids came out of it that day.
Yeah, absolutely. The shooting was in a very formative time in my life too, because I was also in high school. So at that time, we honored the people who did lose their lives in a school assembly, and so I commend you for even being able to speak about it today. It still makes me very emotional, and I wasn't a part of it. So I think that you have a lot of strength to speak out on this today. You had said that you had to stop people from thinking you're paramedics, and you had to tell them that this time it wasn't the paramedics. What does that moment teach you about when survival actually begins?
Yeah. Oh, it's changed my entire thought process on survival. So much so that we've really reworked how we train, who we train. And just to kind of go deeper into it, when someone, let's say, has a cardiac arrest in a public space or even at home, which is where they occur mainly, as we know, the first person there available to treat and to help out is usually the loved one. Unfortunately, across the United States, only about 30% of the time does the loved one provide CPR. So who's next in line is you call 911. Well, it turns out that if you're a very high-performing 911 system, you get 90 seconds to get someone to start hands only, hands on the chest. That doesn't happen in, I would say, 99% of places, because I travel to a lot of places, and I say, how many minutes does it take on average to get the call taker to start CPR? And there's somewhere way over 5 minutes, including my own agencies, which we had to fix. So then who's third in line? Police officers. They're always there first. Turns out that we never trained the police officer to do CPR like we do it at the fire department. And oftentimes they're just on the radio saying, come on in, just come on in. So you have 3 misses. You have 3 opportunities, 3 misses. So we turned this entirely on its head, and we said, maybe everyone shouldn't wait for Brad to show up on scene fourth. Maybe we should focus on the first, second, and third. And it turns out that when you do that, you can triple survival before EMS even shows up. And that was proven in a very, very nicely done South Korean study where they showed that if you live in a neighborhood or an environment or a city, let's take Seattle, they always get the kudos,
accolades. Yeah.
where they teach you from the age of 9 years old to do CPR. It turns out that, and that's why in the Netherlands, that's why their numbers are so high. It's not because their EMS system is better. It's because their culture is better. Their CPR is better. They bring AEDs to the scene 65% of the time,
Wow.
where in the United States it's single digits, if you're lucky. So we had to turn this around to understand, to go back to your question, that we have to understand who really saves the lives, and if the person can have a pulse or at least have good CPR until we can come and, either add electricity or do something different, those are the people whose lives are saved. So that day really did change everything for me, and I've put a lot of focus in not just to my departments but around the country to focus people not on yes, it's good to know how to do CPR, but let's focus on the other stuff that may matter more.
And that really brings out the point of, particularly around an MCI.
Yeah.
Is how are you triaging those patients? What is the protocol that you're using? Are you doing life-saving interventions?
Yes.
If you follow some of the teachings that we have done historically in EMS, and I actually wrote a paper on this and have been teaching around the world and in triage and particularly around disaster triage, right? When time is of the essence. And because we as first responders will show up and become incredibly overwhelmed by the sophistication of whatever the problem is, right? Whether it be an active shooter, whether it be an earthquake or whatever it is. And is then, are we teaching our first responders in the first several minutes of that disaster to show up with intentionality, to be ready to do what those police officers did that day? Right, because one of the things that I've had some discussion, and I work and teach for the Disaster Medicine Fellowship here in Boston at the Beth Israel Hospital, and we have really looked at things like triage in those first few minutes of the actual, the first. Some would argue that the bystanders or the people that are, I call them proximity responders, those individuals that are there that are when the disaster happens, like at the Boston Marathon bombing, then those folks are going to act. But now all of a sudden, fire and EMS shows up. And, if you follow the protocol, you look in the textbook, one of the things that has really, gets me is, we're supposed to, first thing you're supposed to do, right? You get out of the truck, we declare an MCI, and you get on the PA or you begin to yell, anybody who can get up and walk, move over to the casualty collection area over here. And I've been to several MCIs. I've never seen that happen, right? And anybody who's going to get up and walk has already run away, right? And now you leave those folks behind. Are the like if you have your loved one, your wife is injured and she's on the ground, are you leaving? No. If not, if you still love her, right? I mean, that's not you're not leaving. And but one of the things that we hadn't really taught into our first responders is, can we use that person to help? And so when I was at Harvard for a little while, we actually developed a program called Who Can Help? And it was designed to teach first responders to leverage the bystanders that are standing there, leverage the people around them. And we researched it as like, can you ask people to help you? And I had been doing that my whole career, and particularly in the fire service, right? We go to a fire, and the coupling of the hose gets stuck on the curb, and we're yelling at somebody to pull that hose, and so. When we started looking at some of the disasters too, we were down in Sao Paulo, Brazil, doing a disaster drill, and we were watching the fire department, and they have a very resource-rich environment, right? I mean, there's 12 million people in the city, but watching the fire department response, it was taking, think about what does it take to move someone on a backboard or on a stretch, six people. By the time they were 300 yards, right? I mean, a full football, 100 yards, 300 feet. In a football type of field environment, it was 90 degrees outside. They were gassed. Now you think about having to move 200 people. Now, what about all the able bodies around you, right? So I go back to think about the triage. Are we teaching the life-saving interventions? No, there are different triage systems, right? I mean, I think I wrote a paper with, there was 43 at the time. There were 43 different triage systems, right? And one of the biggest challenges around that is there's been no academic data that says this is the best triage system over another one.
Right.
And if you look at like START triage,
Yep.
and START triage was developed for traffic accidents on the freeway in California, right?
Slow moving. Right.
Hoag Hospital, Newport, I believe Newport News Fire Department developed that to sort traffic accidents. It wasn't designed for the multimodality attacks, terrorist attacks that we're seeing across the world.
Yeah.
And with the high energy,
Yep.
whether it be weapons or blast injuries and those kinds of things, it wasn't designed like that. But
well, I mean, if you look at at Vegas, they had a very neat image of all the cell phone dots in that concert in Vegas, and you saw what happened once the shooting happened. The dots just went everywhere because everybody just was running for their lives.
right.
So to your point, Brad, why not teach the Uber driver who's going to be collecting patients who are running for their lives? Why not teach them how to use a tourniquet and give them something in their car so that, and why not teach the general public, everyone, how to do this so that when it comes time to help, they actually have some training instead of just, I think what we've done in the United States today is we've just relied on, let's just call 911 and somebody will show up. But at the end of the day, we do have to rely on each other. And, I love that the folks who are in the proximity. So you're not a bystander.
Right. And I think that if you look at other countries like in Japan and the Philippines, and because they've had some large natural disasters and man-made disasters too as well, they build resiliency into their culture. Right. So they're teaching. They're teaching kids at young ages. I mean, we have those programs. We have a program at FEMA. I believe Rich Serino, who was the deputy administrator, who's one of our Boston EMS guys, who's the chief of Boston EMS. He was there when they developed a program called "Be the Help Until Help Arrived."
I love that.
And so that's an actual FEMA program that's out there right now. Many people don't know about it, and it's really unfortunate that we're not teaching that into the layperson. Because we know, and we'll get to it, I'm sure, is that person standing next to that other person who's having the worst day of their life is going to bridge the gap. And what I love about your story about those officers and the way that you told the story to me of how they were the ones who, in the moment made a huge difference. Yeah, of course, their continuum of care matters, right? Bringing that patient out, bringing them to EMS transfer care to the hospital. So all of that matters. And they were all part of that chain of survival. But it was those in the moment, point of care, right at the patient's, identifying that these were life-saving interventions that needed to be done. And they did them, and they had the training to do it.
Well, it's funny that how long that took us to convince the police officers that they now have to accomplish some medical interventions. And so we started something called MCI Mondays. And on MCI Monday, we had an old church that we would go to. All the police officers, all the firefighters showed up, and we just did a drill every Monday. And if you would show up on that scene, you wouldn't know anymore who the cops were and who the firefighter paramedics were. Because now you have firefighter paramedics wearing ballistic gear and helmets. And now you have the officers pulling patients and placing tourniquets and chest seals. That's when you start to recognize that the culture, at least from the fire department, police department side, now recognize that they are really one, and that you shouldn't just depend on, when Captain Newbury shows up, that let him and his crew take care of it. No, we are part of that continuum of care, just like the spouse is as well. Right? That's a culture change we have to get to.
Yeah, and I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and one of the doctors who was speaking put it quite plainly. He said, "I'm the last stop for you." And I think in America and in our culture, which you were saying, we need to change our culture. But in our culture, right, you get sick, where do you go? The doctor.
That's right.
But the doctor is the last person that you're actually speaking to, right? There's the nurse that comes in, takes your vitals, and maybe a medical assistant. So I love how you put it, that we need to change the culture, because that's really where it begins.
And I agree. I tell people that if I'm watching you in the ER come in cardiac arrest, your chance of survival are very, very low, right? And so, but to try and make people understand that because people have watched, ER and Grey's Anatomy, and everyone just comes to the doctor, and the doctors and the nurses save the lives. No, we don't. We don't. I mean, the lives have to be saved before you get to the hospital, and that transition is much more difficult than people think, right? And so now, if you're a lay person watching this, or a firefighter, paramedic, or police officer watching this, and you think, and many still do, that the care will be given at the hospital, then you really have to flip that script, because it's completely wrong, turns out.
And I shouldn't say most, but there's many people who wouldn't actually admit that. And I think that what you're doing is amazing, and your message that you're getting out there is great.
Thank you.
For both of you, I want to ask, and I want to get Brad, I want your field side, and then Dr. Antevy, I want to hear you from a medical director side. For the EMTs and paramedics that are watching this, they're the people who run these calls every day. What do you want them to understand about the gap between when something goes wrong or right when they arrive?
Do you want to go first?
Well, you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've seen so many times when we show up that people are just standing there, and they're true bystanders, right? They're not helping. But sometimes there are reasons why, right? You talked about earlier the 73% of all cardiac arrests happen in the home. But you might come across. I went to I was a part of a response a couple of weeks ago where we were responding to a cardiac arrest, and the dispatcher was updating us that the wife is on the phone, and she says she physically cannot move the patient to the floor. Right. So you're going to have those calls where, unfortunately, it was a large man, and he was in arrest, and the wife was about 100 pounds, and she physically couldn't get him to the floor. Okay. But then there are other times when we show up and there are able-bodied folks and no one's doing anything. And that there was this gap of time. And as much as we would like to think that our response time is phenomenal, but it's everything from that. And response time, I think, we're only measuring from the time we leave the firehouse to the time we get there, right? When the dispatchers hit the buttons, that's only. But we actually have the reactionary time of the person there. Did they recognize an emergency happened?
Right.
And then once they recognize it, they dial 911. And then there's the turnout time for the fire department. And when we get a cardiac arrest, we're all moving, right? It's like a house fire. You get a report at house fire, firefighters are moving. Same thing. We get a cardiac arrest, choking. Some of those ones where we know that time is of the essence. And I think that's that gap time, right? So if from the time that emergency happened, their heart stopped, to the time that we're showing up, is anyone bridging that gap?
Yeah.
And that's one thing that we have really looked at and championed, is to say, well, how do we make a difference now? As first responders, how do we make a difference in the gap? Because there's this time frame that we know as that the survivability is just ticking away, going down further and further and further during that gap. But also, too, I remember something, Peter. I was in one of your years ago when you first came out, when we actually still doing the Antevy system, right? and you had told a story and about a provider who there was a drowning, and I'm sure you remember this. And he was really struggling with the point that patient, a young child, didn't survive. And I remember, the discussion in the classroom where you had said to me, and said to all of us in the classroom, that no one in a sense, bridged the gap, and because of it, we were so far behind the curve. And there was nothing we could do. And that's the most frustrating part for me, I think, is when we show up, we know we're already well behind the 8 ball on that, and we're not able to make a real difference in that life. And we knew it could have been different.
But I think, so, I mean, that's a story that will forever stay with me. And unfortunately, there's been many other of the similar stories. So there is a way to kind of think through that. So this was a boy who was visiting from another state, and we done a lot of training on what to do when you get there, the whole thing. Well, it turns out that this kid goes into cardiac arrest. He had long QT syndrome, a rare cardiac arrhythmia, and The mom didn't do CPR because she was waiting for the 911 call taker to tell her to do CPR. And it just never happened, right? So we finally get there. It had been more than 10 minutes with, all the times added up. We do everything right there, right outside the bathroom. And we get the kid back, but he ended up unfortunately dying from, cerebral anoxia a few days later. And only until I had my team listen to the 911 call, and then they recognized that nothing happened for this kid for such a long time. Only then did it was the aha moment for everybody, and we said, we have to fix the system so that anyone, whether it's a kid or an adult, is getting care before we arrive. It was really a magical moment for everyone to say, maybe it isn't just me or us as a fire department. Like, we unfortunately cannot be the saviors. The saving, a majority of the saving has to happen before we arrive. Now just think about that. Most people, if you stop people on the street today, you stop 100 people, you say, who's going to save you if you're in cardiac arrest? They're going to say the fire department, right? And yes, we will show up, but wouldn't it be nice if many other people who have the ability to help were doing the helping? And I think that's the power of what this conversation is, which is it's just a minute or two or three. I mean, you watch videos of airports, people falling over in the airport. You see people walking right by them. You see someone, they're dead, they're in cardiac arrest, and people will literally walk over them.
Yeah.
What are we doing wrong in this country where at least you don't go check up on it? And the recognition, which I know we're going to talk about, that's maybe one of the hardest things to do, is to recognize a cardiac arrest, because oftentimes they look like they're seizing. And we had a guy who was at a restaurant. We have it all on video, because anytime there's a cardiac arrest at a public place, I always call for the video. And 9 out of 10 times, the people who are there are not doing anything. This particular guy, they just paid the check. Maybe that's why he went into arrest. I don't know. It's a good ending, so I can laugh about it. And you can see he's sitting up in a booth, just like we're sitting now. And next thing you know, he falls onto his wife, and so it looks like he's having a little bit of a seizure. So she's, come on. One of my firefighters who just retired is in the restaurant right across the way. He recognizes, because no one recognizes what's going on. They don't realize that this guy is in cardiac arrest. He comes over, he moves the wife out of the way, he pulls the guy. Like, literally, it was instinctively he did it. And then next thing you know, he's doing CPR. This guy walks out of the hospital, right? If we would have left it up to EMS, and it was my crew who got there, and we just took over care, but we didn't save that guy. The off-duty firefighter is the one who saved them. But the recognition is still a difficult thing. And actually worked with the federal government. We have something called CPR Lifelinks that we worked on with HHS. We put it up for free, where we put videos of this is what someone looks like when they go into cardiac arrest. And we put it out there. We created a big document. We have PowerPoint videos, free for the public, free for anyone. And now the state of Florida has now made that a requirement, so that every dispatcher, we teach telephone CPR now. We're really getting into those prior to EMS arrival kind of period. And that's why Florida is doing better. One of my agencies this year, which is one of the best years we've ever had, we had a 23% neuro-intact survival.
Wow.
Triple.
Amazing.
And again, I mean, this is something that, not the fire department takes credit for, but the community takes credit for that. The dispatchers, the call takers, the police officers, the hospital. I mean, it is, like you said, one long continuum that we all have to play our part.
Yeah. I think, to go back to how you were saying that people just walk right by, and there's such lack of community, in the sense that we're not checking up on each other anymore. Social media plays a huge impact in that, a huge role in that, in the sense that we have become so desensitized to so many things based on what the media shows us. And the only way to fix that truly is what you're doing, is to show people the signs of what's actually happening. These people are in imminent danger. We need to help them. We need to be that community. So the statistics you're giving us are amazing. So great job on that.
Appreciate it.
There's a study from Korea that you actually spoke about earlier, and I want to dive deeper into that a little bit. I want you to walk us through the numbers because those numbers are extremely important,
Yeah.
especially in this conversation.
Yeah. So if you look at that study, and I believe it was from 2019, I believe, but they looked at survival from cardiac arrest, neuro intact survival from cardiac arrest, whether you got no bystander CPR and no telecommunicator CPR, 3%. Then if you actually implemented telephone CPR, you go up to 9%. And then if you actually have a community where they know CPR needs to be done, they'll start it without calling 911, right? So if the bystander can act prior to calling 911, you're at 12%. So you go from 3 to 12 before EMS even shows up. And it's interesting because if anyone on this call has ever called 911, you recognize that there's a lot of questions they're going to ask you before they even get to what's going on, right? And then they're going to ask you to do a couple of things, but very rarely, unless they're trained in doing it, very rarely will they have you start chest compressions, and maybe some will get to that. Very few will continue it all the way through, right? Then they'll say, is there an AED? Go grab the AED. So people need to, and I gave a whole lecture. I gave a lecture to families of my kids' school, and I said, I gave them insight into what happens when you call 911, and people were shocked as to all the questions they ask, how long it takes. So we need to do, I think, a lot more education on recognition, understanding like what is the reason to call 911. And just to let them know, send Captain Newbury to here, but that shouldn't, you shouldn't wait for permission is what I'm asking, what I'm trying to say. You ought to have the permission to actually do something and start CPR without having to dial the 3 numbers to get permission. And it's a very nuanced point, but people think they have to call 911, tell them what's happening, nothing's happening in the meantime, and then you finally get there 3, 4, 5 minutes later, and then when the call taker says, okay, I want you to go ahead and put them flat on their back on a hard surface, and I want you to do CPR, we shouldn't have to wait for that instruction for the typical layperson to do CPR. That is a very important point that I wish we could get across maybe on social media, TikTok somehow.
Yeah. So the single most important, powerful intervention in cardiac arrest survival isn't a drug or a paramedic. It's the person nearby who recognizes it and decides to act. Why don't you think that more people act?
That's a great question. Obviously, you could go to the fact that people are, they're screaming, they're upset, it's very emotionally charged. I get all that. But I think more why they don't act is because when you're in cardiac arrest, it's not like the movies where you're just, out, right? Oftentimes there's movement. Oftentimes there's kind of what we call like guppy breathing, where they're, so you often hear people will call and say, oh, they're breathing. So now we've had to train at our dispatch center that if a person is unconscious and you can't wake them up, and then they're not breathing normally, very key, they're not breathing normally, then you must start CPR. That is the definition. So day 1 of school, if you want to be a dispatcher, they teach you the definition of cardiac arrest is that they're unresponsive, you can't wake them up, and they're not breathing normally. So why can't we teach everybody that whether they're moving or seizing? And here's why. So I'll get to what I think the real answer is. People are afraid that if they start CPR on someone who's not dead, that they're going to harm them. But we have data to suggest that you will not hurt. Maybe you'll break a rib. Who cares? You'll take some Motrin, right? Yeah. Maybe you'll cause some bruising of the chest. That's okay too. So in healthcare, there's something called an over triage rate. What does that mean? It means that, for example, how many people do you take to the level 1 trauma center? Well, you're not going to be exact and get all the right people there. You end up having a 30% over triage rate. When you get to the trauma center, they say, nah, not really for us, but it's okay. Turns out there should be a 30% over triage of chest compressions in your system. So here's what was happening there. We told our dispatchers, we want you to start more CPR than is probably needed. What happened is the medics would get to the scene and the person wouldn't be in cardiac arrest. So what would they do? They get on the radio and they kind of slap them back. That wasn't cardiac arrest. So we have to train our medics. You're going to be now going to many more calls with CPR in progress that you're going to get there and you're going to say, okay, let's just stop. The person just had a seizure. So you have to go in and really understand the psychology of why people don't do it, fix it, and then go and train your fire department or your paramedics and say that when you get there, we as a community, we are going to be asking for much more CPR, 30% more than is required, because that's how more lives are going to be saved. So if you think about it, it's not as easy as just saying, oh, cardiac arrest, you should be doing CPR. Well, if you don't know what it looks like, if you didn't start it, and then if your medics get upset over the radio, then that call taker next time is going to be like, oh, I don't want to get that. That took years for us to fix.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It really is a system, and,
Yeah.
and the system includes the community.
Yes.
And it goes all the way up the chain of ranks from there.
But I will tell you that, so just for some average numbers, if you're in a population of 100,000 people in your community, you'll get 100 cardiac arrests, of which you'll work 50. So do the math on that. That means that can we train 100,000 people this year in this 100,000 person community to save 50 people? That's hard, right? But 100% of the cardiac arrests are coming through 911, right? Now they make AEDs that will alert you, and they have communities that are responding. We have a place in Florida called The Villages, where it's neighbors helping neighbors, where on every street, someone is responsible, and there's an AED in every row of houses. Well, they have one of the highest, neuroattack survivals. Why? Because it's neighbors, like you said before, neighbors helping neighbors, and no one ever said, let's wait for EMS to come. It's, no, we're going to do the basic BLS, because you don't need the drugs. Epi, amiodarone, all the other stuff. If you need those, if we can get there early and we can treat you early, there's a very high chance we'll get you back.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, I mean, you have talked, based on your background in psychology, you talk about the psychological effect of that, right?
Yeah.
In the bystander effect.
Absolutely. I mean, our bodies and our brains are biologically our biggest gate that blocks us to actually be the ones to step forward, whether we don't want to hurt them. But I think the major other role that's played is the fact that we look to everybody else because we don't find it within ourselves to do it. And we think that somebody else will be better equipped to.
Right.
And we really just have to bypass that bystander effect and really rewire our brain to be the one to step forward and say, I can do this. I am equipped to do this.
Isn't it true, and you probably know the data since this is your field, but I remember there's a study that shows the more people that are around, the less likely it is that somebody's going to do anything.
Yes.
That's true? Yeah.
It's 1,000% true. And it goes down to even just calling 911, not even performing CPR.
Because you assume someone else is going to do it.
Exactly,
Right.
Exactly. So,
but also too, I mean, there's another population that's kind of not talked about either, where people are reluctant to perform CPR, right? In women.
Yes.
Very true.
Women are almost 30% less likely to receive bystander CPR in public.
Really?
For the fear of many men won't go
Exposure,
over,
right,
and
right.
exactly, they don't. We could go on a long tangent about this, but I think that
I know you're passionate about it.
just
That's why
I
I poked the bear.
am very, very passionate about this.
And you should be. And you should be.
Exactly. I think just by putting it out there and just by saying that these are the statistics and this happens, then hopefully, even if that saves 2 or 3 more women, then.
Well, I was just saying, women and kids, you put them in the same bucket because it's the same thing with kids, and you really got to continue messaging and explaining to people why, and it will save lives, right? And that's the purpose of our conversation today. Is like, giving people these statistics, and making them understand that it's okay to do these things, whether it's a child or an adult. These conversations don't really happen. People assume I got a card, and therefore I'm prepared. But you're not really prepared unless you think through some of the things that happen And that's why these conversations are important.
Hey, Kiera and I created a video for the layperson that we're releasing as part of our book. Is will you be the one?
Mhm.
And do you see yourself from a psychological
I
standpoint?
love
Is
that.
like, do you see yourself
love
as the
that.
helper?
Yes.
Because too many times, we as first responders, we see ourselves. We're the ones we're the helpers, right? We're coming.
Mhm.
But do you see yourself as that person that will react to the situation? Because too many people, going back to the bystander effect, see other people as that. They don't see themselves in the moment. And so what we're trying to do is help bridge the gap, that time gap, but then also create some of that level of confidence that if they do have the knowledge, the skill, the ability, the training, but do they psychologically see themselves as the helper, and that they're going to be the one to step forward?
Well, it's important. You guys got to get this word out, right? So that's why this is so important. Where go to the schools when all the parents are there. I mean, it's important to have people learn CPR and understand how to recognize it, etc. It's not just understanding that cardiac arrest needs CPR. Role playing in your own mind and being prepared for that moment is so critical.
Well, and we talk about how, yes, training and education will help in the moment. Absolutely. Everybody should be trained in this. But training and education aren't the only things that are going to make you step forward. The thing that we want people to step forward for is experiences. And for us, it's easy to go out and to get experiences because we work in the field. For the layperson, it's definitely not as easy. You may see that once in your entire lifetime. But emotions are tied so heavily to memory. And when you read our book and you go through these stories, it is extremely emotional. And it was extremely emotional for the two of us to not only write them, but to hear
This is why we always have
survivors.
tissues here in the studio, because there's a lot of tears that
Yes.
were let on in here.
And it was emotional for us to hear the survivors' stories and their family stories and what came from that. But we hope that these stories now can turn into your own experiences, and that will further the certainty that you will step forward.
Well, I love that, because it's the same reason that we bring the survivors back to the fire department. It's the same reason we bring the survivors back at our annual ceremonies, because it's telling even my newer paramedics who just started that this is possible. And we go and we tell the entire story of, like, from the 911 call, and we talk about the entire event and the case. And if you're sitting in the audience and you're, let's say, a new paramedic, you're now saying to yourself, A, it's possible, it's doable, and that could be me next. And, so it's the same thing for the layperson. If you've never done it before, read the stories. There's lots of videos online that you can watch as well. But we as a society have to prepare ourselves without being like, fear mongering.
Right.
We should recognize that as citizens, as people who live in whatever country you live in, that you may be asked to help. I mean, I firmly believe, like, one of my dreams is that every person would have at least a training of, like, an EMT level. So, for example, my paramedic schools in Florida, we actually have we're like stationed at the high schools now, and we have a lot of high school students who, when they leave high school, they are now certified as an EMT because they took a class that the high school gave. Why does it take so long? The state of Florida, we were one of the last states in the union to require CPR training before you graduate high school.
Massachusetts still doesn't require it.
Seriously?
Yes.
If you're listening out there in Massachusetts, you got to fix that.
Yes. Well, we've had a real big bone to pick with Massachusetts these days.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and actually, one of the stories within the book, a young girl named Madeline. You can read the book to really get into the nitty-gritty, but she is now, because her life was saved, she's advocating with Senator Bruce Tarr, who is a senator in Massachusetts, to change legislature. And I think it's really prevalent these days, and this stuff really matters. Massachusetts is one of 7 states that doesn't require it.
Well, I mean, advocacy is huge. So if all the people listening, I think that you can make the biggest impact with advocacy. So at your state legislature, the state of Florida just moved Project Adam, which is a program that now goes to every single school. And so I've been working with them as well, Because when Project Adam says, hey, we have a couple of schools in your neighborhood, what I say is, all right, I'm going to assign a fire department within my larger fire department. That station will be your attached school, that station in that school, so that now when there's training being done at that school, who comes over to help out and train together is the fire department. So now you're taking teachers, parents, all the students, you're giving them a plan, you're giving them training, you're taking the fire department, you're integrating them now. And we've had a number of amazing saves. And for more statistics, when you look at the entire pediatric and adult cardiac arrest profile for 2025, the highest percentage of saves happened in the adolescent group, the teenager group, because those are the kids who fall over on the basketball court, on the football field. And when they go into arrest, they go into VF arrest. They have a shockable rhythm. Time is ticking, as you said. So, it turns out that that cohort of people, is the highest group that we can save. We need to train everybody. Mm-hmm. So advocacy is what I would say is huge.
And it's interesting, the pushback.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not, it's from folks that you would not think would be pushing back.
Because everyone thinks it requires a lot of funding to do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how much do we have to appropriate to, let's say, a Project Adam or some other program? And, what is the ROI on that? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, if there's not lobbyists pushing because there's a financial reward on the end of it. And so it ends up having, people like us who are just community members keep fighting and fighting, but there are breakthroughs, and
Mm-hmm.
very, very proud of what the state of Florida has done, and other states, I'm sure, are following.
Yeah. Well, let's hope Massachusetts follows too. Brad, you've arrived on scenes where somebody was there the whole time and didn't move, not because that they didn't care, but because they didn't know what they were doing or what they were looking at. What do you want to say to providers who are watching this about how to talk to their communities about that moment?
Well, I think it's important that as first responders, we do have these conversations with our communities, that we have conversations whenever you possibly can. And of course, I think in the moment, right, when the emergency has happened, that's not the time to have a conversation. It's whether it's before or even after too. And it's following up with the families and truly, going out into the community. And, when I was in fire prevention, I really started to think about some of the challenges. And this was back in 2001, and I say, we taught. One of the programs I developed while I was there was an elderly fire prevention program for the elderly, because there was a big gap. So we think about 2001, who the elderly folks were. They were the people that prior to the 1970s, they didn't have fire prevention when they were in primary school, right? So, and here I was as a fire prevention officer going in and teaching from pre-K, right, which was always interesting, but all the way up through mostly middle school. One of the things that we if I was to think about a program that could have an incredible impact to talk to the community, is why are we not doing that with first aid and CPR, right? Why are we not putting the same types of commitment that we made to fire prevention? Because, if you asked anyone right now, what would you do if your clothes are on fire? And most folks would say, stop, drop, and roll.
Right.
Why? Because we've been teaching them since primary school, since they were in kindergarten.
Yep.
And we had videos. I remember anybody out there is close to our, my age, you'll remember those old Donald Duck videos where people actually died in those videos, and then they went to heaven and then they came back down. But why are we not doing that for CPR? Why are we not doing that for first aid for these kids? Right. I think we're missing an opportunity. We're missing that incredible opportunity to not only have the conversations with community leaders, with school officials, and then that's where fire and EMS and I know we focused a lot on the fire department, and there's a lot of folks that are probably out there viewing that they might be a third service EMS, they might be a private sector EMS, and I think those folks are important too. That they're pulled into this as they're serving the communities too as well. So, and I see that, that piece is missing, right? And it also brings, I think, back to our why, right? Our self-actualization of in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If if you learned that in school, And I think it's important that as we as providers and as I age in this profession, and I look back over my career, I look at so many opportunities lost where we could have had conversations with the community, we could have had conversations with community leaders, and we missed those opportunities. And one thing that really sits with me and is that we talk all about these numbers, right? And we're talking about moving the needle 10%, 15%. And what I want not only our viewers, and I think many of the folks here in the room understand that each percentage point relates to lives saved, right? So if we have about 350,000 out of hospital cardiac arrests every year. If we can increase survivability by 10%, we're going to save 35,000 more lives. That's a huge number. And that's what drives me every day, is that number, that gap. And I have my own stories from not only being on the side of it as a provider, but also on the side of it as a loved one, right? And one of the stories in the book is my own dad, who suffered an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. And two bystanders emerged from the crowd, and he was in a parking lot at a middle school, and they filled the gap. They filled the time gap. And then fire and EMS showed up, and they resuscitated him.
Yep.
And so when I think back about, can we make a difference in the way that we speak to our communities, and then it drives us back to that why. Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
And to me, if we could save 35,000 more lives, isn't it worth it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's worth it for all those lives that were saved, including your own dad. What happens to those people as they move forward the next year, and the experiences? And for me, a recent one that has a big impact is one of my father-in-law's best friends who had a cardiac arrest on the tennis court. And Cliff, the tennis instructor, started CPR, brought an AED. Another gentleman came and started CPR. They shocked him twice. And 32 minutes of CPR. We did double sequential. We did a second set of pads on this guy when we came in. 32 minutes later, and now I've had a chance to connect with this gentleman. I've played tennis with him. He sends me videos, and his son sends me videos. They were in Portugal recently. They went to Disney World recently. One of the daughters had her big birthday party, and so now it's probably been a year and a half now, and my phone is full of memories after the event, after his new birthday. We give him the rebirth date is what we do for him. But if you look at my phone, all the videos and all the memories he's sharing after the save, that's what keeps me going, and knowing that if we can make one extra save, you're not just saving the person, you're saving their entire family. And one other thing, that because this is important from the psychological point of view, if there's a child who doesn't get saved, I've seen years later, I've seen kids coming in and commit suicide because their sibling passed away. And so once you've been doing this long enough, like we have, you start to recognize that when someone doesn't get saved, it's like a grenade blows up, not just for the family, but also for the clinicians who were on that call. Psychologically, it just tears everyone apart. So one save saves many lives after that.
I think it's
you want to really. I'm sure what you're talking about is survivor guilt.
Oh yeah,
and that it can happen across so many different circumstances.
Yeah, it does.
Well, I think that's a great segue into understanding like why we wrote this book, and the name of it. And Kiera, I'd love for you to kind of unpack the name. Where did it came from? What is the name? Where did it come from? Why are we talking about this book?
Yeah. When my dad had come to me originally, he asked me to write this book with him, and I turned him down 5 times. I said, no, I just don't think that's what I'm going to do after college. And he just kept coming back, and he was like, please. And I said, okay. So I went back to my dorm, and he had told me to really sit with it and think on it. And as I was sitting there and I was thinking, I had really just kind of turned my mindset in the sense that my writing couldn't help save lives, and I really changed that to this book is going to change lives and save lives. And as I was sitting there and really sitting with it, he had brought me the title of just saved. And I didn't think that that totally encapsulated the moral theme that we were trying to portray in this book. And so I was toying with different names, and I went to him and I said, "Have you heard of the butterfly effect?" And he said, "No, I've never heard of it." I said, "Okay, well,
I don't watch movies.
to put it in short story, it's a butterfly flaps its wings in South America and can cause a tornado in Texas." And he said, "Okay, what does that have to do with anything?" And I said, "Well, I think that is what we're trying to portray in this book, that these micro decisions and these micro moments can cause catastrophic outcomes that are entirely different than if it didn't happen." And so I said, there's so many effects that are very much like this, but I think that this is its own effect. This is the saved effect. This is what happens after a life is saved and everything that comes from it. So he, of course, another proud dad moment. He was like, "That's genius." And I rolled my eyes and I was like, okay.
But immediately, like what happened to me was I started thinking about Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future, and if he interacted with one person, one scene, something could change the outcome of the future.
Yeah.
And then that, as I started thinking about that butterfly effect, and of course I went and researched it, and I started looking, and I started thinking about what she said about the saved effect. So when a life is saved, what is the effect that it has? And the reason that I even started down this journey was because of two amazing stories where I was involved in the resuscitation, and those people lived this incredible long arc of time. With Frank, 25 years, and then another gentleman, John Perino, lived for 27 years. And John's story is an amazing story because we did more than 30 plus minutes of CPR. Bystander CPR was going on when we arrived, and this was 1997. And so John, was on the dance floor. And by the way, I actually, EMS folks and fire folks will love this. I left some breadcrumbs in the book. And if you're paying attention, in the very beginning of the story, it says, the band No Exit was playing in the Polish club in Abington, Massachusetts on this date in November, right, in 1997. And that legit was the name of the band, No Exit. Right. So you think about that, right? Because I remember Jack Glynn, who was my partner that night, we were working non-transport hospital base, and I'll let everyone read the rest of how we got to where we were and being in those moments. You talked about those God links. And so when I remember I'm kneeling on the dance floor and I'm getting the equipment ready. I'm ventilating with a bag valve mask, getting my intubation equipment, and I kind of look over and I see this name of the band, and it hits me. And later on, it wasn't until Jack and I are going into the call, I said, "Hey, did you see the name of that band?" I guess John wasn't exiting that night, right? So, but the point of that was, John spent 2 weeks in a coma. And he woke up neurologically intact, and then went home to his family and lived another 27 years.
God bless. That's amazing.
And I'm just old enough in EMS now to have seen that, right? And I didn't stay connected with the family like I did in the Nagel family, but Jack did, and Jack's now the Abington fire chief.
Oh wow!
Active, still out there, active as the fire chief. And so when John passed away, his daughter, Lisa, had come in. I saw Jack had posted something on Facebook, and it was a picture of him and Diane, his wife, and John. And Jack had made some comment about it. And I went in and I said, in the feed, because this book started because of a Facebook post. And I mean, I'm being facetious in a way, but because I also had, let me finish that story. So I in the feed there, I said to Jack, like, "Hey, I remember every detail of that call. I mean, every detail." And as you know, and folks that are here listening know, there are some calls that just stick with you and not in a post-traumatic way, right? But more so an impactful way. And so I said, "Oh, I remember every detail of that call." Well, all of a sudden I get a notification. Somebody commented on my comment, right? And it was his daughter, Lisa.
Oh.
And she said, "You two have no idea what you gave our family." And that was the moment that really hit me.
Yeah.
Like, she had said, because of you two, my dad got to walk both his daughters down the aisle.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't just us two, right? It was an entire chain.
Sure.
And it was bystanders, which we actually didn't know who they were. Of course, in the moment, none of us, we don't stop. We might say, "Hey, thank you for doing what you were doing." But I'm not writing their names down, and maybe we should, right? But we didn't. And it took all these years until after he passed away, where we actually went out and found one of the bystanders and interviewed him.
Oh wow! You found him.
Found him.
Wow.
And
impressive.
I remember when we walked up and we were walking across the dance floor, and Rich Plastow was doing CPR. Of course, I didn't know his name then, and I was like, "Man, he's doing great CPR."
Mm-hmm.
Well, little did we know, he was an off-duty Mansfield firefighter EMT. Mm-hmm. And there was a nurse who was doing mouth to mouth, like giving him ventilation
back in '97,
right? And so it was that moment that I knew after that, as I really began to sit with it, and the other story that I've been telling at paramedic graduations of Frank and his survivability, and I always told the story from a metaphor of like throwing a pebble in the pond.
Yeah.
You talk about it's that tight ring and that first plop of as that ring moves out and what the ripple effect that it has on people's lives, positive and negative, right? If they live, what happens?
Yeah.
And then if they die, what happens?
Yeah.
So, and that's really where the name of the book, The Saved Effect, came from, was Kiera's brilliant idea here. Yeah. But it's really that the stories behind it, and we have a number of amazing stories in that book.
And that's why I love the name of the book. I love the purpose of the book, because I think being able to see the arc, and you guys really do such an amazing job of like showing all the arcs and all of these stories, where most people, whether they see it on TV or what have you, and I hate to say it, most people don't deal with death well in America, right? So if you think of the people listening, when someone calls and you say, "Hey, did you hear that John's mother passed away?" People immediately say, "Oh, that's probably." I feel bad about that. But like, what should you do at that point? You should probably reach out to John.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No one does that.
Go give him a hug.
Right. Go give him a hug.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Give him a call. Send a letter. Go to the house. Go to the funeral. Right. Most people shy away from what happens afterwards. So in the book, when you show all these arcs of all the folks who actually lived and the good outcomes from it, if people started to internalize what their action today could lead to, it would lead to many more people doing something unseen. So I think because no one really exposes what happens to these people afterwards, and they don't get them together, we have to do a better job of doing that.
Well, I think we do, like you had said earlier, like, hey, we brought Alan back and the fire department, everyone got to a big hug, right?
Yep.
But then that was a moment.
Yep.
And you have developed a relationship with him.
Yep.
So that you can see the bigger picture, and I'm sure you share that with your folks.
Oh, yeah.
But think of all the people that maybe we do bring them back, and it's months later, but then years later, like what happened?
Yes.
We don't know those stories.
Yes.
And I think as one of the things that, as Kiera and I, one of the things we did was we brought everybody here into the studio. We had interviewed them on camera, and we started asking some of these questions, and what it did for me, it was so cathartic. As a paramedic, and because it really drove home my why. And I think this book has two big purposes, both on the healthcare side and the layperson side. So for us as healthcare providers, it connects us back to why we do what we do, right?
Yes.
Like when you see the true impact that you made on someone's life, we can't fathom it. I mean, I think when I really started back, sometimes I sit there and I'm like, this is absolutely amazing of what can really happen after that life is saved.
Yeah.
And so when you ask me first questions like, why after 40 years do I continue to show up? It's because of those folks, those moments, those people. And we'll have more of them. And also too, we have all this knowledge, skill, ability, experiences, and we know that matters. right? So that matters to that person. It matters to their family, and having those skill levels and teaching into the next generation. And one of the big reasons I asked Kiera to do this too with me, one, she is a great writer, and two, she's an EMT and was working in the emergency room. But I also see that we, as we get older, need to pass the torch.
Mm-hmm.
We need to bring in that newer generation and to be able to instill the core values that we grew up with in EMS, but also to show them that what they do matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were asked yesterday on a podcast, how do we recruit and retain people?
Yep.
What is driving that? And then I think that if you can show people the true difference you make in a life, and connect that to why they should be part of our profession, I mean, I think that is gold.
And it's necessary to keep people in. So, in Florida, we started giving blood in the field. I know you're doing it, thank God, and now in the state here as well. We've given probably about 400 units of blood in the last couple of years, and we have a 90% success rate of saves. I can't tell you how many of my folks have come back to me and said, I never want to retire. Right? So imagine how many people are now want to come into a profession where they know that trauma we can save, cardiac arrest we can save, pediatrics we can save. We've done so much with stroke in the pre-hospital setting we can save. So coming into a profession where you're making a difference and it's palpable, like there's dozens of people every year in my departments that are coming back to life.
Yeah.
And you celebrate them. And so the last thing we did, we had a bar that has numbers on it. You can slide in and out. So when you come to Palm Beach County Fire Rescue and you look on their shirts, and you'll see people have a 5, a 7, 10. And we started that years ago. Now they proudly wear not the number of ROSC, of how many pulses we got back, how many neuro intact survivors. And so now everyone you go on, the first thing they look at is how many do you have? It's a proud moment. It really is.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to get back to Dr. Antevy. You had kind of hinted about the story with Alan. I really want you to kind of deep dive into that. We're unfortunately running out of time here today, but we have around 15 minutes left, and I really, really want to hone in on this story. Do you think that you could go into it and kind of go full detail with it?
Yeah. This is really a story of great bystander CPR, preparation at the tennis court. So and then really the part of the story that's really most impactful for me is that sometimes the care that you receive at the hospital may not be so good, and how do we overcome that? And I'll kind of go into that as well. But this tennis court decided not just to put an AED like in the clubhouse. They put AEDs all over the place. And so when I went to go visit, when you go down that sidewalk in court, 13, 14, 15, 16, there's an AED. You go down that bank of courts, there's another AED. So they put them everywhere. That was great preparation. The tennis instructor knew CPR. The other person, the other bystander, the other tennis player knew CPR. And when he fell over, literally he had maybe within 30 seconds, they were doing chest compressions. So there's something in our field that we call the no flow time, which means no one's doing CPR. And then there's a low flow time, which is the time where someone's doing CPR. So it's lesser flow. You want the no flow time to be as close to zero as possible. And so Alan got that, thankfully. It turns out he had a pacemaker in where the battery had failed. He had a pacemaker in for 30 years ago.
Wow.
It wasn't working. He went to a cardiologist 10 years back, and the guy said, I'm not even sure why they put that in. You don't need it. Well, he did need it. Okay, so he's in an arrhythmia that is going to be hard to get out of. The CPR started. AED number 1 gets on. My father-in-law texts me because my father-in-law is playing tennis, and he says, how many times will they shock somebody before they stop? And I said, are you in Palm Beach County? Because that's my department. Yeah. I said, we're not stopping. We put a second set of pads on. He got 6 shocks total. But without that CPR in progress, he never would have gotten back. We actually, in my department, we stopped giving epinephrine for shockable rhythms, which is, against
Blasphemy.
Blasphemy, right? And then, again, we have triple the survival, but anyway, it's a different story. And so anyway, 32 minutes later, we get in, but here's the part. We get into the emergency department, and he has pulses back. ER doctor says, for how long has he been down? And we say 32 minutes. And the ER doctor rolls his eyes.
Yeah.
Goes up to the ICU. He's on 3 different drips, 3 different infusions. And the doctor upstairs is already telling the family, it's time. You better call your family from New York, have them come down. That's when I get the phone call. So my father-in-law had given the son my number. He calls me 2 days later saying, he says, I got your number. They told me that you could help. And I said, what's going on? He says, they want to pull the plug. And you said in your story that 2 weeks he took him to wake up.
Yeah.
Turns out that a lot of hospitals pull the plug because they see that you're older. They hear 32 minutes, and they just tell. And some people do it in the emergency department. They say, we're just not going to continue. Make a long story short, it took him several days to wake up. The tube came out. But if it wasn't for a phone call from me to someone I know to go up, to put a balloon pump in him, to help his heart, his weak, very weak heart, to finally go from 3 drips to 2 drips to 1 drips to no drips, then Alan would have died. So you have the chain of survival. We started off talking about bystander. We talked about 911. We talked about police department. We talked about EMS. Fine. That chain happened to work for Alan. We get to the hospital, and they almost dropped the ball. So what have we done in the state of Florida? We now we have something called Resuscitate Florida, where we've now asked the hospitals to sign a document that says we will follow these set of rules for patients who come in after cardiac arrest, and one of it is prognostication. We will not pull the plug just because the guy's old and he was under for quite a long time. So if you think about the saved effect and what has to happen in the house of medicine, it really takes a village, including the hospitals that you're transporting to, making sure that when you're transporting that patient, Alan, to an emergency department, that they actually take the baton and they run with it in the same direction. Because unfortunately, now that we have the CARES database, we see hospitals that have a 15% survival, and we have hospitals that have a 0% survival. You have EMS systems in this country that have a 1% survival, and you have others that have a 21% survival. We don't know who those people are because they won't tell us. But depending on where you are, what city you are in, what you're living in today, may impact your survival. So from the saved effect, it'd be much higher if we get people to understand what it means to intervene, fix the system, fix your community, and then your EMS system will take the baton, and then your hospital will take the baton, and that 350,000 rate hopefully will go down significantly. That's the goal anyway.
Well, and I think when we think about, I know here in we have all these tertiary care centers that are very close. Right.
Throw a stone.
Yeah, you're going to make a decision. Do I go to the community hospital or do we take them to a tertiary care center? And as a anecdotal experience, but I know there's data to support it. But I tell is that will the patient get the same care? And there's a great story in the book where I talk about literally putting my dad in the car and driving him to Boston from a local hospital, and not that they were a bad hospital. It's just that they don't have the same resources. They don't have the advocacy, and they don't have the experiences either. And
it's all volume related.
Right. My daughter who's a ER nurse will tell you that there's my other daughter Bridget, that there is a real difference in the nursing care that goes on at tertiary care centers versus non-tertiary care centers because of the experiences of the nurses. So we know that experience matters, right? And your experiences of resuscitation mattered that day for Alan because you had seen these other patients like, hey, if you do these things, his chance of survivability goes up. But if you had a physician who was managing his care and never really had those other opportunities to see that, didn't have those same experiences, he's not even thinking that way. And it's not his fault. He's not a bad person. He's not a bad doctor. But he might not have had that all the information to make great decisions that day.
So wouldn't it be nice then, Brad and Kiera, if we can make the outcomes transparent? Wouldn't it be nice to know? So everyone listening to this podcast today, this webinar today, I'll guarantee you if I said to them, where in your community would you want to go if you had a cardiac arrest? I mean, I know the answer in my community because I have the CARES data. But when I look at the data, I'm almost sworn to secrecy. I'm not allowed to go and say. I mean, I can go to the hospital and say, hey, the numbers don't look so good, but those data are not available to the lay public, right? So I'll guarantee you that a hospital that has a 0% survival, if you put a billboard up and said, hey, this hospital has if no one has lived here when they come in with cardiac arrest.
Can you imagine?
Right, but I'll tell you what would happen. They tomorrow would get on the phone and say,
Be better.
let's get people in here. What do we got to do to get better?
Yeah.
So I think that we could fix a lot with advocacy, and the state of Florida has started to do that. I think we should do that as a community, is be honest with what's going on in our community rather than, and for the people listening who are just transporting people to the closest hospital, I think you ought to do, and again, what we just did in Florida, where we will now only come to you if you've been designated as a resuscitation center of excellence. And by the way, when you look at the American Heart Association guidelines, you know what they say? That we should be taking people to, and they call it resuscitation centers of excellence. But not many people have done that. Why? Because it takes work, it takes time, it takes money. But I think that in order for the saved effect to have full effect, we really do have to look at the entire system.
Yeah,
we do.
Yeah, those are some really, really great insights. We're at the point in the webinar now where we're going to start answering some of the chat's questions. So if anybody has any more questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to try our best to get to all of them. Kyle says, how do we make a change in a system that still believes in a load and go mentality instead of stay and stabilized? He says, I work for a state department, but I live in a load and go system. What's the best way to approach my hometown?
And I think I know which Kyle this is. Kyle Goodnight, great guy. He's right. Most agencies are load and go. Why? Because they've been trained for a long time that the hospital, the doctor, is who's going to save the life. So what I would say to Kyle is the following. Very simple. Look at the data. Look at your own data. So there was a city that I visited many years. I'm not going to name the city. They said to me, we don't believe in this staying on scene thing. So I took the chief to the side. I said, Chief, do me a favor. Go back in your data, look at the last 24 months, 2 years of pediatric data, pediatric cardiac arrest, find out what the number was. And then of that number, the total numerator, how many, the denominator, how many of those kids walked out of the hospital alive? And I thought he'd never get back to me. He called me 2 weeks later. He says, Pete, I got the data for you. I said, what is it? He said, 50 arrests, 50 pediatric arrests, 0 survivors. He said, that's all I need. Because it was the hospital, it was the pediatric ER doctors who said, Chief, you just got to bring him in. We'll handle it. He made the change. And literally, if I say within a month, he called me back and he says, we just got our first save. And so all it takes is one case for you to experience it, to see it. And it's almost like the whole blood. One of our very first cases was an officer who was shot in the groin because the partner was shooting the dog, unfortunately, who was attacking him. So he shot the dog. It ricocheted off the wall into the partner's groin, put a hole this big in the groin. This guy was unconscious when we got there. We gave this guy, so we had a knee in his groin because we couldn't tourniquet it. We squeezed in a unit of blood. The guy wakes up. Now, this guy lived. Imagine the stories, and this is a 1,500-person fire department. Within a day, the whole department knew about this case. And everybody wanted to be the next person to give blood. So to Kyle, I would tell you that go look at your data, have someone have the chutzpah to stay on scene and actually do the job. That one save transforms the department. And I've seen it because now we're in 3,000 cities. My email box, guys, is full of stories that no one will ever hear about.
Yeah.
We don't put them on Facebook or anything, but like I share them with my team and I say, here's a story from little town America where they have 2 trucks and the children's hospital was a helicopter ride away and they had to be with this kid for 40 minutes, saved the kid's life right by the pool, got him to the local hospital, got him to the children's hospital. Kid walked out of the hospital, was not on the news, was not a story, but you have a family who's got their child back. So,
and that kid could grow up to be president someday.
That kid could grow up to be president one day.
Absolutely.
Right. So, but the one main thing is it doesn't take the fire chief to do that. It takes someone like Kyle to do that, or the new medic to scratch and claw and make some noise and say, why aren't we doing this? And I go on social media and I see people say, well, my department, we don't do that here because the leadership isn't good. Well, make it better. Become the chief one day, right? Keep fighting until it gets better.
And I think you can also, I mean, you look at some of the what other states are doing. You look at some of the state protocols. You know, Rhode Island put it in their protocol. You cannot leave for this amount of minutes.
Right.
So you must stay there.
Right.
Is the patient still in VFib?
Right.
Then you must stay there. And I think that's important, right?
That's Nick Asseline, Joe Loro. Those are people who fought the system. Listen, if you look at my protocol set, it looks nothing like the AHA.
Yeah.
Right? I thought people would come knocking on my door saying, how did you get to triple the national survival rate? No one calls, no one asks. Because
they're afraid of the answer.
Correct. Because we're going up against kind of like their guidelines, and if they agree to it, then that means that maybe their guidelines don't matter. But at the end of the day, I'm going for the truth. Like, I don't care about your guidelines or your guide. If you came to me and said, you wouldn't believe what we're doing. We're giving, estrogen during a cardiac arrest, and it's working, and there's some data behind it. I mean, it has to be supported by data.
Yeah.
But look at
Didn't Paul Pepe do a study like that?
Yeah, he did. But look at Sheldon Chesky's did a double sequential study.
Amazing, yeah.
New England Journal 2022 published double survival. The guidelines don't endorse it. We have now 43 survivors from double sequential defibrillation. We just posted a case report that we had on the very first shock. We did double sequential. The guy walks out of the hospital. So unfortunately, the guidelines and where the current medicine is, and unfortunately, there aren't going to be randomized controlled trials that are going to happen on many of these things in our lifetimes. We're in a very precarious situation.
But that study out of Toronto was done exceptional.
Exceptional.
Right? And I was very, very, I don't want to say angry, but really, really, really upset that wasn't in the new guidelines. Like that data, and I understand why, but still.
But the good news is that there's 3 other studies being done right now, and the one that's being done, and it's called the Double D out of Sweden. The early pilot data shows something like 41% versus 9%. That double sequential, early double sequential, because that's what we've done. We've already moved our double sequential now to shock number 2, or as early as possible. But again, I think that you're either someone who's just going to believe what people are telling you, or you're going to look at the data, evaluate the data for yourselves. Unfortunately, if you're in a state where you're a statewide protocol and you're kind of limited, it's a little harder, like here. Where in Florida, we have the ability to kind of do other things. But the science is needed, the data is needed, publications are needed. Randomized controlled trials would be amazing if we can get them done.
I'm sure that department that you spoke of, where they had no pediatric resuscitations or rescues, then had one. The mentality shift in that was huge.
Tremendous.
Exponential. It was great for the community that now we're having that. However, for the first responders, I'm sure prior to that save, they were going into all of these pediatric rescues with something in the back of their head saying, we're not able to do this.
Oh my God.
And now to have that, it brings hope. Eric
Howard out of in Missouri, he runs a big system called Mercy. And there's an email that I have that I can't even read the email because I cry, okay? And he says that what we used to do, and like I'm not going to get into it too much, but I don't remember exactly how the wording is, but he says, well, if we would have done what we used to do, this kid would have been dead. This kid is alive, and it was on Christmas Day. That's why I get so emotional about it. Like, he says that because of what we do now, this kid is alive. And he says it just changed his entire department to not they all die, but maybe they all can live, right? You're turning the exactly upside down, but it does take leadership. It does take people who are going to speak truth to power, fight the fight, go to the conferences, come to the best schools, learn the best and then go back home and challenge it, right? And if you find some data, so when people say, hey, how could you do what you're doing? I send them folders, my Dropbox folders. People know they get my Dropbox folders, and the Dropbox folders are full of data. Now, there's a lot of observational data, which is hard, right? But these people are dead.
But if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck,
Right.
it's a duck.
Right.
I mean, that's the problem with double-blinded studies, right? Like with true traditional studies,
Right.
it takes years and years and years to get through it. And even though along the way you know based on observation that it makes a difference, and I understand the anecdotal part of that, right?
Yeah.
But at some point, and Peter, you have done that. You champion that cause. You're the first one to say, that looks like it's going to work. There's enough data for me. Let's do it.
Right.
And I love
Absolutely.
that about you, is because you do have the chutzpah or the intestinal fortitude
Right.
to stand up and say, this makes a difference, and this is going to save lives.
And I want to get to this question. It's 2:31 now. We're coming to a close. One more question from Barry. They just want you to speak a little bit on liability and how O2 flows with hands-only CPR. So, in your fullest capability of answering the question, but as quickly as
When you
possible.
say O2 flows, what?
Yes. So, speak on a bit on liability and how O2 flows with hands-only CPR.
How oxygen flows with hands-on CPR?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I just had a guy on my webinar. I do a Friday webinar. Everyone's welcome to join. And this is a guy who, brilliant, he's a trauma surgeon. And what he did was he actually put the oxygen right over the larynx. So, and again, this is not for the layperson, but it's just going to prove the point. So he actually went and he put an ET tube, but he hooked up oxygen, high flow oxygen to the ET tube. He didn't put it through the trachea, just put it right above the trachea. And they just did CPR. That's it. They didn't squeeze any bag at all. And they did this on pigs, okay, 12 pigs. How long do you think that pigs sat stayed at 100%? Give me a number.
I think the Navy did a study. It was like 20 minutes.
This
plus.
was 16 minutes.
Yeah.
16 minutes. So that means that when you're doing CPR, now there are people who have tried. Oh, there are people who have tried doing hands-only CPR with only oxygen flowing, but from oxygen up here. There's evidence today, and I just want to go back because I want to make sure I'm clear on this. There's evidence today that doing CPR only with passive oxygenation is not good, meaning that many people now are going to 30 to 2 throughout the entirety of the code. And here's why. There's a really quick physiology. Is that when you're in cardiac arrest and your lungs are collapsed, the blood vessels squeeze down, and all the CPR you're doing, if the blood cannot come through the largest bed of blood vessels, which is your lung, so by giving that 2 breaths every 30, and you're opening it up, what's also opening up the blood vessels, and you're getting better flow. So I am now a believer in 30 to 2 throughout the entirety of the arrest, rather than doing continuous. And so there's been a lot of back and forth, but more and more the data that I'm looking at would suggest to me that expanding the lungs during cardiac arrest, it's very important for blood flow. So I kind of answered the question both ways, that doing CPR with oxygen just sitting at your larynx could probably keep you at 100%. But I'm also saying that expanding the lungs are important for blood flow, not for oxygenation, but for the flow of blood during CPR. So that I'd be an advocate for that. And we're kind of slowly changing from passive oxygenation to actually giving breath during CPR.
But
Yeah,
for the
that's great.
layperson, right, who's not willing to do ventilations, compressions is
Absolutely.
Well, remember, because for the first 10 minutes, theoretically, if you die from sudden cardiac arrest from an arrhythmia, you have plenty of oxygen. It's not like someone who went into an asphyxial arrest and their O2 sats were low. So if you're a layperson, just push on the chest. That's all you got to do.
Great. Well, thank you so much for everybody in the room who joined us. But thank you so much, Dr. Antevy, for everything that you've done for us, for the community, and for this book. This book is meant for absolutely everybody. It's not just meant for healthcare providers. It's meant for all of those people who need some inspiration on how to act and be willing to act. And our mission with this is so that people are inspired They get trained in CPR and they're ready and willing to act. You can find The Saved Effect at www.thesavedeffect.com. You can pre-order it there from any of your favorite retailers, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Target, Walmart, any of those. Head back to thesavedeffect.com and then fill out the form there, and we'll actually send you $300 worth of bonuses in a package, which include the early manuscript and early audiobook. Thank you so much, Dr. Antevy. We are so truly grateful for everything that you've done, and we want to leave you with your own personal copy of The Saved Effect.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
you so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks, man. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Amazing job.
Thank you.
I want this signed, by the way.
Oh, it's signed.
Oh, you already signed it.
We
Yes.
already signed that for you.
And
Yes.
with that, thank you so much, everybody. We hope that you can join us again someday.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Amazing.